Hello and welcome to Frontrunner Motorsport. This is the fourth and final part of the ranking every Lotus Formula 1 driver ever from worst to best series. So make sure you have seen the previous three. We have looked at 46 Lotus drivers up to now, but the final 15 are some of the greatest names in Formula 1 history. Whilst not all with Lotus, the drivers on this list secured a total of 19 championships and 220 Grand Prix wins. Shows you the calibre of driver Lotus could persuade to drive for them. Or maybe it was the other way around and driving for Lotus was a stepping stone to stardom. Whatever the case, these 15 drivers would easily slot into a list of the best 50 Formula 1 drivers ever, and the majority of them would push for the top 20. But in what order would their performances for Lotus put them in on this list? Let's find out. Make sure you subscribe and let's jump into the video. Number 15, Carlos Reutemann. To be honest, his single season at Lotus is kind of a side note for the rest of the Argentine's otherwise successful career. He began in Formula 1 in 1972 with Brabham, and in his 5 seasons with the team, took 4 wins and finished 3rd overall in 1975. He then moved to Ferrari in 1977 and took 5 wins and finished 3rd in 1978. And he ended his time in Formula 1 with 2 years of Williams, where he took 3 wins and finished 3rd again in 1980 and runner-up in 1981. In between his time at Ferrari and Williams, he raced for Lotus in the 1979 Formula 1 season. He finished 2nd in Argentina and Spain, and 3rd in Brazil, and at Monaco, and with points scored in South Africa and Belgium. After 7 races, he was 5th overall, and only 10 points off 1st place. And then he failed to score for the rest of the year and fled to Williams. It was enough to finish 7th overall, but that early season form could have been championship winning form if it had continued throughout the year. Sadly, it was just a missed opportunity. Number 14, Mika Häkkinen. The only driver in this final part of the list who raced for Lotus in the 1990s, Mika Häkkinen began his Formula 1 journey with Lotus in 1991 after winning the British Formula 3 Championship a year earlier. The 2 seasons at Lotus saw a few points finishes and nothing much else, but he's this high on the list because that was a massive achievement. Lotus were not in a fit state by the time Mika Häkkinen joined the team, so scoring regular points, especially in 1992, was an incredible job by the Finn. So much so, Lotus didn't want to lose him to McLaren and entered a bitter contract dispute. Ultimately, McLaren won. Mika Häkkinen would spend nearly the next decade with them, taking 20 wins and 2 titles, whilst Lotus disappeared into non-existence after 1994. Number 13, Jackie Ickx. The Belgian sensation drove for 10 teams in his 13 years in Formula 1 and had the majority of his success with Ferrari and Brabham, but he did also spend a season and a half with Lotus in the mid-70s. He finished runner-up in Formula 1 twice and took 7 wins, leaving Ferrari after the 1973 season. He bounced around after that, but he did join Lotus in 1974 and stayed through most of 1975. He didn't take wins and in fact had a lot of retirements, but he did take several podiums. He even took wins in non-championship races. But overall, it was a tough time, with Lotus transitioning between cars. After Lotus, Ickx raced for Ensign, Frank Williams, Walter Wolf, and Ligier at nowhere near his previous level. He also won multiple Le Mans 24-hour races, won the Dakar Rally, Bathurst 1000, the Can-Am Series, and Spa 24 Hours. One of the greatest of all time, still knocking around racing historics very occasionally at the young age of 80. Number 12, Ins Ireland. One of the earliest Lotus drivers, Ins Ireland was a lieutenant in the army when he began racing in the mid-50s, and just a few years later he was racing in Formula 1 with Lotus. He competed in their second season in the Lotus 16 and secured a couple of points finishes in a sea of retirements. In 1960 he took several non-championship wins and guided his Lotus 18 home to 4th in the championship. He was then injured at the 1961 Monaco Grand Prix, but carried on with Lotus for the rest of the year and took his first and only championship Formula 1 win at Watkins Glen. Despite the win, he was sacked by Lotus in favour of Jim Clark, and Ins Ireland spent the rest of his time in Formula 1, often racing customer Lotus cars for Reg Parnell and the British Racing Partnership, scoring occasional points and the odd non-championship win. He retired from racing in the late 60s with 50 Grand Prix appearances, several attempts at Le Mans, and even a stab at the Daytona 500 in 1967. Number 11, Gunnar Nilsson. The sad story of Gunnar Nilsson, one of Sweden's great hopes, only had a brief time in Formula 1 through no fault of his own. He came to prominence in 1975 with a championship-winning British Formula 3 campaign with March, beating teammate Alex Ribeiro. Whilst Ribeiro would go on to race for March in Formula 1, unsuccessfully, Gunnar Nilsson was hired by Lotus as a swap deal with March, with friend and compatriot Ronnie Peterson going the other way. Nilsson spent 2 years with Lotus and battled hard against serious unreliability, but occasionally proved his talents with podium finishes and a win at the 1977 Belgian Grand Prix. Even with that win, he only managed to finish 8th in the championship, and he never had the chance to do better than that. Shortly after, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and so his race career ended. Gunnar Nilsson passed away a year later. He was only 29 years old. Far too young. Number 10, Nigel Mansell. The 1992 Formula 1 champion began his time in Formula 1 with Lotus, but it was not a happy time for Nigel Mansell. It definitely had its ups and downs, but by the end, Mansell and Lotus were glad to see the back of each other. Mansell had a tough time in Formula 3, but impressed Colin Chapman at a test event and was given the role of a reserve driver in 1980. He made his full-time debut in 1981, but struggled compared to teammate Elio De Angelis. He scored a few podiums for Lotus, but never took a win. Once his friend and boss Colin Chapman died and Peter Waugh took over the running of the team, Mansell's time was up, as Raw really seemed to dislike Nigel Mansell. He was kept on for 1983 and 1984 because sponsor John Player Special wanted a British driver in the car, but despite results improving and points scored throughout the 1984 season leading to a 10th overall, Mansell was still behind Cesaris and was replaced by Ayrton Senna. Mansell went to Williams, started to win and challenge for championships, finally winning in 1992. Peter Waugh said Mansell would never win a Grand Prix as long as he had a hole in his arse. He died in 2010, I presume from an obstructed bowel. Alright, it was a heart attack. But when it came to Mansell, Peter Waugh was full of shit. Whilst a tough time for Mansell, his spell at Lotus was a time of transition from a powerhouse of Formula 1 in the 1970s to a non-existence by the mid-90s. He did well to get podiums and points in an unreliable car. That's why he's 10th on this list. Number 9, Nelson Piquet. In 1988, Lotus replaced a Brazilian future 3-time world champion with a Brazilian already 3-time world champion. But neither Lotus or Nelson Piquet were in the best place by the late 80s. Nelson Piquet had been one of the top drivers of the early and mid-80s, taking 2 championships with Brabham and another with Williams in 1987. He joined Lotus because he wanted to be the absolute number 1 driver, and he got that. But what he also got was a dire car. The 100T was a complete mess, a poorly designed car with a very good engine. The same Honda engine the dominant McLarens had on board. Piquet managed to score a couple of podiums in the first 2 races, but would only score points in 5 other races, including another podium at the final race of the year. Good enough for 6th in the championship. No Lotus driver ever finished that high in the championship ever again. Piquet only did 1 more year at Lotus, scored a few points, but no podiums, and he even failed to qualify at Spa. He left for Benetton and ended his career with a little more dignity. After a very successful Formula 1 career, I can't imagine Piquet looks back on his time at Lotus too fondly. Number 8, Elio De Angelis. The Italian only started racing cars in 1977. He won the Italian Formula 3 Championship that same year and was racing in Formula 1 just 2 years later. He was even on Enzo Ferrari's radar as a possible replacement for Niki Lauda. Instead, De Angelis started his Formula 1 career with Shadow and moved to Lotus in 1980. He became the youngest driver to get on a Formula 1 podium after a second place at Brazil at just 21 years old, a record that would stand until Ralf Schumacher beat it in 1997. De Angelis scored regular points throughout the next couple of years and took his first win in 1982, and finished 3rd in the championship in 1984, despite taking no wins, albeit a long way off Niki Lauda and Alain Prost. He consistently outpaced Nigel Mansell when they were teammates, but from 1985 he was joined by Ayrton Senna. The pair finished 4th and 5th in the championship with Senna a few points ahead. De Angelis took his second win that year, but felt Lotus were favouring Senna, and so moved on to Brabham. He only got 4 races into the 1986 season before he was killed in a testing crash at Paul Ricard. A sad waste of a very talented racing driver. Number 7, Mario Andretti. Our first champion on this list, Mario Andretti was a star of American single-seaters all the way back in the mid-60s. He made his debut in Formula 1 with Lotus at the American Grand Prix of 1968 and made a few appearances in 1969, whilst also winning the Indy 500 that year. He spent a few years making sporadic appearances for Ferrari and March, winning at South Africa in 1971. Despite this, he didn't attempt a full Formula 1 season until he rejoined Lotus in 1976, winning the Japanese Grand Prix and finishing the year 6th overall. He finished 3rd in 1977 and won the championship in 1978 after the death of teammate and main challenger Ronnie Peterson. Mario Andretti stayed with Lotus for 1979 and 1980, but the team fell away from the front of the field, and he left to join Alfa Romeo in 1981. He made a single appearance for Williams in 1982 and finished up with 2 more races for Ferrari. He would go on to win the kart series in 1984 and was still racing into the 90s. His final race was the 2000 24 Hours of Le Mans. In 2025, he is involved with Cadillac's 2026 Formula 1 entry, just 58 years after his Formula 1 debut with Lotus. Number 6, Jochen Rindt. Formula 1's only posthumous champion, Austrian Jochen Rindt was only racing for 10 years before his death at Monza. in 1970, but he accomplished a lot in that 10-year period. With a fair number of GT and Formula 2 victories behind him, Rindt made his Formula 1 debut in 1964 in a Rob Walker-prepared Brabham, but failed to finish. He joined Cooper for 1965, but the car was not competitive and Rindt had a rough year, although he did win for 24 Hours of Le Mans in a Ferrari alongside Maston Gregory. Rindt had a much better 1966, finished third overall and taking 3 podiums. After a poor 1967 with Cooper, he joined Brabham for 1968 and then Lotus for 1969. He retired from the majority of races up to this point, but 1970 was a big turning point. 5 wins in the first 9 races puts him clear in the championship, even with 4 races to go after his death. Number 5, Graham Hill. Alongside Cliff Allison, Graham Hill was the first Lotus driver and worked for the company as an engineer. He only passed his driving test in 1953 and got his first taste of a racing car a year later. He spent 1958 and 1959 with Lotus, retiring from 12 of 16 starts. He moved to BRM in 1960, took his first wins and the championship in 1962, finished runner-up in 63, 64 and 65. Despite beating Lotus at the 1966 Indy 500, Graham Hill rejoined the team for the 1967 championship. He retired from the majority of races in 1967, but won the championship for a second time after Jim Clark's death in 1968. He took his final Formula 1 win at Monaco in 1969, but broke his legs at the US Grand Prix and was moved to the Rob Walker team for 1970. He also raced for Brabham and his own Embassy Hill team, before his own untimely death in a plane crash in 1975. To this day, Graham Hill remains the only driver to complete the Triple Crown of Motorsport, with his wins at Monaco, the Indy 500 and 24 Hours of Le Mans. 10 years later, his son Damon Hill began his own racing career, and 38 years after Graham won his second championship, Damon would become a champion as well. Number 4, Ronnie Peterson. There's a lot of tragic death in this part of the list, and that is sadly going to continue for a little while longer. Ronnie Peterson was Swedish F3 champion and European Formula 2 champion, and started in Formula 1 in 1970, racing for Colin Crabb. In 1971, he finished second in the championship to Jackie Stewart, finishing second in 4 races and third in America, all for March, who were also only in their second year of Formula 1. Impressive, but he did have almost half as many points as Jackie Stewart. Peterson raced for March again in 1972 and joined Lotus in 1973. He had another strong campaign, winning for the first time in France with further victories in Austria, Italy and America, and third in the championship. More wins came in 1974, but Lotus soon lost out in the development race, and after a delay getting the 77 ready, Peterson left after 1 race in 1976, heading back to March. But it was not a good time, and outside of a shock win at Monza, nothing much happened that year for Peterson. He moved to Tyrrell for 1977 and had an even worse season, so went back to Lotus for 1978. He and Mario Andretti dominated the championship. Mario led home 4 1-2 finishes for Lotus that year, but Peterson took 2 wins and 5 podiums to keep in touch with him. That was when he was killed at Monza in a crash involving most of the field. The Super Swede took 9 wins for Lotus and was second and third in the championship. One of the greatest drivers never to win the World Championship, and in my opinion, the best race driver Sweden has ever produced. Number 3, Ayrton Senna. The last truly successful Lotus driver. He may never have won a championship for the team, but he was the last real star made by the Lotus team. He joined Lotus in 1985 after an impressive debut season with Toleman. He took his first Formula 1 win in his second start with Lotus at the Portuguese Grand Prix, but the 97T was unreliable, and Senna retired from a fair few races, but did take another win at Spa and finished 4th overall. 1986 went much the same, with 2 more wins, more podiums, a lot of pole positions, and 4th in the championship. His final year with Lotus was tougher for Senna. Despite finishing at this point a career best 3rd overall, he was lapped by both Williams cars at the British Grand Prix and spent the entire season chasing them. But one thing that did work out for Senna was the positive relationship he built up with Honda. Senna and Honda joined McLaren in 1988, and by 1993 they had won 3 championships together. Senna joined Williams in 1994, and, well, what happened there is well known to everyone. Ayrton Senna took Lotus's last Formula 1 wins and performed incredibly well for a team that was at the beginning of their eventual drop down the field and the end of their existence. Despite his best years coming after his time at Lotus, Senna was one of their best ever drivers. Number 2, Emerson Fittipaldi. After the tragic end to the 1960s and equally tragic start to the 1970s, Lotus needed a new hero, and that hero was Emerson Fittipaldi. The 1969 British F3 champion was given his first starts in Formula 1 in 1970 in a 3rd Lotus alongside Jochen Rindt and John Miles. After Rindt's death and Miles leaving the team in the aftermath, Emerson Fittipaldi suddenly found himself as the number 1 driver and won the United States Grand Prix in just his 4th start. 1971 was spent developing for Lotus 72, which, in the hands of Emerson Fittipaldi, took the 1972 season with ease. 5 wins took Fittipaldi to his first title. 1973 started off even better, with Fittipaldi finishing in the top 3 in the first 6 races, including wins in Argentina, Brazil and Spain, but results tailed off and Emerson Fittipaldi struggled for the rest of the year, losing out to Jackie Stewart. After that, Fittipaldi left for McLaren for a couple of years, winning a second title before strangely dropping right down to the bottom of the grid by joining his brother Wilson's racing team. He raced for the Fittipaldi team until after the 1980 season. Emerson went back to America, won the Indy 500 and the Kart Championship, and has lived long enough to watch more of his family members race in Formula 1 or in the junior formulas. None of his many relatives have come close to matching the career of double champion Emerson Fittipaldi. Number 1, Jim Clark. Of course it's Jim Clark. Not only is he the best Lotus driver ever, he may well be the greatest Formula 1 driver ever. He's definitely a name you often see in those kind of conversations. From the 1959 24 Hours of Le Mans to his death, Jim Clark was rarely not in a Lotus. He made his Formula 1 debut in 1960. The same year he won the Formula Junior Championship. He got a few podiums in 1961, but was also involved in the tragic death of Wolfgang von Trips and 15 spectators. Jim Clark's first win was the 1962 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps, and 2 more that year was good enough for second in the championship behind Graham Hill. In 1963, Clark dominated Formula 1 with 7 wins from 10 races. He won again in 1965, this time winning 6 of the first 7 races, and the one he didn't win was Monaco, which he didn't take part in because he was busy winning the Indy 500. 1966 was disappointing as Lotus did a poor job of moving to the new 3-litre rules of the time. Clark had a better 1967 with 4 wins, but lost out to the more reliable Brabhams. He started 1968 with a win in the South African Grand Prix, but that would prove to be his final Formula 1 race. Jim Clark was killed in a crash in a Formula 2 race at Hockenheim, a dreadful accident that shook Formula 1 to the core. His record in Formula 1 is unbelievable. 25 wins from 72 starts, 2 championships in 7 full seasons. He was also a Formula Junior, British Touring Car, multiple-time Tasman Series champion with a win at the Indy 500, all for Team Lotus. Jim Clark will always be a legend of the sport and the greatest Lotus Formula 1 driver ever. So that completes our look at every Team Lotus Formula 1 driver ever ranked from worst to best. The top 15 is a list of some of the greatest drivers in Formula 1 history, which just goes to show how influential Lotus were and what a force to be reckoned with in the 1960s and 70s. Despite all the attempts at bringing Team Lotus back to Formula 1, you can never truly replicate the original Colin Chapman-led Lotus team. Lotus does still exist, but it's been passed from owner to owner, and current owners Geely show no interest in motorsport, let alone Formula 1, and like I said, it wouldn't be the same anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree with this list, or would you make some changes? Are there drivers from lower parts of this list you'd put in this video? Make sure you subscribe for more motorsport content. A new members only video is coming in the next couple of days. Thank you very much for watching and supporting the channel, and have a good one.